4 days after we entombed my grandmother, my smartwatch vibrated on the desk. My sister messaged, "We just landed in Dubai. Enjoy the mess." I set the fabric down like it was made of glass. It was one of Hester's old lace doilies, smelling faintly of lavender and decades of dust. I smirked because I'd frozen the $450,000 brokerage account the morning before she departed. My grandmother's Chicago brownstone wasn't just prime real estate. It was the mahogany staircase where I learned to tie my shoes, my small fingers fumbling with the laces, while she sat on the bottom step and patiently talked me through the loops. It was her homemade peach cobbler every Thanksgiving, until her hands stopped working. After that, Grandma still sat in the parlor every holiday eating bakery pies because she refused to let anyone else use her oven. 8 months before the owls confined her to a chair, she handed me a flash drive and whispered, "Protect it. I'm a forensic accountant for a corporate firm," and she knew exactly how vultures operate. My sister Nadia is the type of charismatic that gets away with everything. She has this laugh that fills a room and makes people want to give her whatever she's asking for just to keep the sound going. Her husband Jasper is the exact same, just with a luxury watch collection and a custom-tailored suit to hide the lack of substance underneath. Together they were a walking bankruptcy court disguised as high society. They'd crash at the brownstone for 2 weeks of free lodging, demanding Hester change the brand of coffee she bought because Jasper's stomach was sensitive, then ignore her calls for the rest of the year. One Christmas, Nadia begged for a loan to fund a boutique that never opened. Her husband pointed at a first edition Hemingway on the shelf, said, "We'll just consider this collateral," and shoved it in his briefcase. Hester just watched him do it, her lips pressed into a thin line, too exhausted to fight. When Grandma started declining, they magically became devoted. Unannounced visits, soft tones, inquiries that mimicked empathy but felt like an audit. Who manages the trust? Is the deed still in her name? Does the hospice care eat into the principal? Grandma would force a smile and say, "Your sister is finally maturing." I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. She passed away on a Thursday. My husband Arlo stayed right beside me through the hospice nurses bagging up the medical supplies and the deafening silence that followed once the machines were turned off. Nadia breezed in late for the service, Jasper trailing behind, eyeing the antique furniture in the parlor like he was at an auction. For 6 days, they badgered me. Bypass the waiting period, tap into the liquid assets, maybe list the property before the market cools. They cornered me in the kitchen. They cornered me on the porch. The night before they jetted off, Jasper stopped me in the hallway. He blocked my path, smelling of expensive scotch and cheap intentions, and muttered, "You shouldn't shoulder this burden by yourself." He handed me a business card for a sleazy liquidator, didn't break eye contact, and walked away. 5 days after they flew out, the estate broker Bowen Locke called. His voice was tight, professional but laced with an underlying panic. Someone had submitted a digital authorization to liquidate $75,000 in municipal bonds. I pulled up the system on my end while he talked. The IP address didn't originate from Illinois. It pinged off a server in New York, but a quick trace showed it was bouncing from an unsecured network at JFK Airport, right around the time Nadia and Jasper were waiting for their Emirates connection. The authorization was voice verified, Bowen said, hesitating. "But Imogen, it doesn't sound right. I shouldn't be sending you this directly, but given your background," he sent me the file. The voice verification recording was a spliced audio file created using clips from a family group chat. I sat at my dining table, knuckles white, and pressed play. "Yes, I authorize the transfer." The cadence was metallic, entirely stripped of Hester's natural warmth. I recognized the word yes. It was clipped from a video Nadia had taken last Christmas when she asked Hester if she wanted more tea. Hearing a dead woman's voice weaponized to drain her own life savings made my stomach turn over. The audacity was sickening, but the execution was sloppy. I looked at Arlo, who was leaning against the doorframe, watching my screen. He just nodded and said, "Bury them." So I went to work. I exported every digital log, the raw audio file, the IP bounce trace, and contacted the firm's fraud department. The next afternoon, I locked down the $450,000 portfolio and transferred the assets to an untouchable trust that required dual authentication from both me and Bowen Locke to even view the balance. I initiated the probate paperwork and a federal cybercrime report. Then, I left exactly $9,000 in her standard checking account. I knew their itinerary. I knew the luxury resort in Dubai required a massive hold on the card for incidentals upon check-in, plus the cost of the first few nights. $9,000 would clear the initial authorization, getting them into the suite, letting them unpack and order champagne. But the moment the hotel ran the subsequent authorizations for their planned desert excursions and spa treatments, it would hit a brick wall. I acted like I was completely oblivious, leaving the trap perfectly set. A week later, Nadia messaged, "Wire is processing. See you never." My security alert pinged almost immediately. Her attempt to pull the $75,000 had finally hit the decoy account and bounced off the measly $9,000 limit. I waited 36 hours. I wanted the resort bills to pile up. I wanted them to try another card, realize they were maxed out, and feel the sheer panic of being stranded in a foreign country in a hotel they couldn't afford. The phone rang on Tuesday evening, displaying a Wu-Wei country code. I let it chime 3 times, sipping my black coffee. Then I picked up. "What's the emergency?" I asked, my voice flat. Nadia shrieked, "What did you do to the accounts?" Her breath hitched. The background noise sounded like a hotel lobby echoing marble, the faint sound of a water feature. She was likely hiding in a corner away from the concierge desk. I replied, "I executed my legal duty and secured the assets." She spat, "That money belongs to us," like she was reading from a script Jasper had written for her. I leaned back in my chair. "Grandma left you 20 grand, and that's it." I took a slow breath. "I also have the fabricated audio file you submitted." Dead silence on the other end. "Next," I said, keeping my tone perfectly measured, "I have the IP logs pointing straight to Jasper's laptop at JFK." Then I finished with, "I have the broker's sworn security affidavit." Nothing but the hum of a hotel air conditioner and Nadia's ragged breathing. There was a shuffling sound, the phone being ripped from her hand. Jasper grabbed the receiver, his voice dripping with fake diplomacy. Imogen, let's be reasonable and handle this offline, he coaxed. There's no need to let misunderstandings tear this family apart. Reasonable people don't deepfake dead women from another continent, I said. Jasper tried to interrupt. You're confused about the timeline. I cut him off. 2 choices. Make a decision right now. I let the silence hang for 3 seconds. Choice 1, you fly back, sign a legally binding waiver abandoning all claims to the estate, and take the basic inheritance. I heard Nadia sobbing faintly in the background. Choice 2, I said. I submit the cyber theft packet to the FBI. Nadia snatched the phone back, her voice breaking. You wouldn't actually destroy my life. You tried to rob Grandma blind, I said. So spare me the victim act. Following a heavy pause, Jasper got back on the line. The fake diplomacy was entirely gone. His voice was cold, sharp. What's the protocol if we return? You sign, you walk away, and you never contact me again. I ended the call. I didn't wait for his confirmation. I set the phone face down on the desk and rubbed my eyes. Arlo walked in and set a fresh mug of tea in front of me. They'll sign, Arlo said quietly. They don't have the leverage. They don't have the cash to fight it. I agreed. We went to bed that night feeling a sense of absolute closure. The trap had worked. The vultures had been grounded. The next morning it was raining. A hard, relentless Chicago downpour that battered the windows of the brownstone. I was in Hester's parlor, packing away her collection of porcelain birds, when the doorbell rang. It was the postman, holding a thick, rigid envelope sent via certified mail. I signed for it, walked back into the kitchen, and tore the top off. It wasn't from Bowen Locke. It wasn't from the probate court. It was from a private title agency downtown. I pulled out a stack of stapled documents, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon until I hit the summary page. Notice of default and intent to foreclose. I stopped breathing. I read the header again. It was attached to the brownstone. According to the documents, a hard money loan of $150,000 had been taken out against the property on April 14th. That was 3 weeks before Hester died. 3 weeks before she lost the ability to swallow, let alone sit upright at a desk and negotiate a private mortgage. I flipped to the signature page. There it was, Hester Farrow, written in a shaky, erratic scrawl that barely resembled her handwriting. Below it was the stamp of a notary public, Caden Trask. I pulled out my laptop and frantically searched Caden Trask in the state registry. His license had been revoked 2 years ago for falsifying real estate transfers in Cook County. Jasper hadn't just gone after the liquid assets. He had known the bonds might take time to clear. He had used a dirty notary to pull equity directly out of the house while he and Nadia were doing their devoted, unannounced visits. They hadn't just been checking on her health, they had been securing collateral. Arlo came down the stairs, tying his robe. What is it? He asked, seeing my face. I slid the paperwork across the kitchen island. The $9,000 trap in Dubai wasn't the end of it. Jasper and Nadia didn't need the bonds to fund their life. They had already stolen $150,000 in cash against the house, and the first payment had just bounced. If I didn't clear the fraudulent lien, the brownstone, the mahogany stairs, the kitchen where she baked, the parlor where I was currently standing would be seized by a private lender by the end of the month. Let them come, I said. I'll make sure the porch light is on so they don't trip on their way to the door. Jasper let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. You're not listening to me. These aren't people who send polite letters. They're going to take the house, Imogen. They have the promissory note from Morrow Holdings. If Quill Funding forecloses, my guys get nothing. So they are going to physically take possession of the property to force a sale. Then they can argue with the Chicago Police Department, I said. Jasper, listen to me very carefully. You are no longer my problem. Your debts are your problem. Your investors are your problem. You forged a dead woman's signature. If anyone sets foot on this property, they are trespassing, and I will have them arrested. If you ever call this number again, I will forward the audio file of your fake authorization directly to the FBI field office. I hit end. Then I blocked the number. I looked at Arlo. He was already pulling his toolbox out from the hall closet. We didn't bother calling a locksmith. Arlo took a crowbar, wedged it behind the brass backplate of the back door's deadbolt, and ripped the entire mechanism out of the wood, lockbox and all. He drove to the hardware store, bought 3 heavy-duty deadbolts, and spent the next 2 hours replacing every lock on the ground floor. While he worked, I sat at the dining room table with Hester's estate file. I needed a lawyer, a ruthless one. I found the business card for Emerson Wynn, the attorney who had drafted Hester's original trust documents 7 years ago. I called his office. His paralegal, a woman named Vesper, told me he was booked for the next 3 weeks. Tell him Imogen Farrow is calling, I said. Tell him Hester Farrow's title has a fraudulent hard money lien on it, the primary suspects are in Dubai, and the lender is initiating foreclosure in 26 days. I need 30 minutes. Vesper put me on hold. 60 seconds later, Emerson picked up the phone. Be at my office at 2 o'clock, he said. Bring the default notice and every shred of correspondence. Emerson Wynn's office was in a gray, brutalist building downtown. It smelled like old paper and expensive floor wax. He was a man in his late 60s with sharp eyes and a posture that suggested he had never slouched a day in his life. He spread the Quill Funding documents across his mahogany desk and put on a pair of reading glasses. He read in silence for 10 minutes. The only sound was the ticking of a heavy wall clock and the rain lashing against his window. Finally, he took his glasses off and pinched the bridge of his nose. It's a clean forgery, he said. On paper, it looks perfectly legitimate. The notary stamp makes it ironclad in the eyes of the county recorder. Quill Funding doesn't care that the notary's license was revoked because the state's lag time gives them plausible deniability. They have a recorded lien. They hold all the cards. So how do we strip it off? I asked. We file a quiet title action, Emerson said. We sue Quill Funding, Morrow Holdings, Jasper, and Nadia. Nadia. We subpoena the notary, if we can find him. We drag them all into Chancery Court and prove fraud. How long? Arlo asked. He was sitting next to me, his hands resting on his knees. In Cook County, 18 to 24 months, Emerson said flatly. The courts are backlogged. And here is the real problem. Filing a quiet title action does not automatically stop a foreclosure. Quill Funding can proceed with seizing the house while we're arguing about who really owns it. To stop them, we have to file for an emergency preliminary injunction. Do it, I said. An injunction requires a bond, Emerson explained, his tone softening just a fraction. It was the tone you use when delivering a terminal diagnosis. The court will require you to post cash equivalent to the disputed amount to protect the lender's interest in case we lose. That's $150,000, plus my retainer, which for a contested fraud and injunction case starts at $25,000. I stared at the edge of his desk. The grain of the wood suddenly looked blurry. The liquid assets are frozen. I locked down the trust yesterday because they tried to steal the cash too. I saw your email, Emerson said. You did the right thing. If you hadn't frozen the accounts, the money would be gone. But now the money is inaccessible. To unfreeze it, we have to petition the probate judge, which means explaining the fraud, which triggers a mandatory investigation hold. The money will be tied up for months. You can't use it for the bond. You can't use it for my retainer. He leaned forward, folding his hands. Imogen, if you don't have $175,000 in liquid cash sitting in a personal account right now, we cannot stop this foreclosure through the courts before the 26 days are up. The room went dead silent. Arlo reached over and took my hand. His grip was warm, anchoring me. What are our other options? Arlo asked. You negotiate, Emerson said. You call Quill Funding and offer them a settlement to release the lien. Or, you sell the house yourself, pay off the lien from the proceeds, and walk away with whatever equity is left. I am not selling my grandmother's house to pay off my sister's criminal debt, I said. My voice shook, but the anger was burning away the panic. It felt hot and clean. I will burn it to the foundation first. Emerson didn't blink. I appreciate the sentiment. But the law doesn't care about sentiment. It cares about leverage. Right now, Quill has it all. Your brother-in-law cornered you. We left Emerson's office an hour later. The rain had stopped, leaving the city air thick and heavy with humidity. We drove back to the brownstone in silence. I kept looking at the windshield wipers, watching them flick away the leftover drizzle. Jasper had built a perfect trap. He knew exactly what he was doing. The sloppy audio file, the IP address, it was all a smokescreen. He wanted me to feel smart. He wanted me to feel like I had caught him, so I would lock the doors to the vault from the inside, trapping myself in the dark while he dismantled the house brick by brick. When we pulled onto Hester's street, I saw a car parked in the driveway. It was a white Lexus SUV. Standing on the front porch, peering through the glass panels of the front door, was Sable Ives. I put the car in park, unbuckled my seatbelt, and got out before Arlo had even turned off the engine. I walked up the cracked sidewalk, my boots splashing in the puddles. Sable turned around. She was holding a clipboard and wearing a beige trench coat that probably cost more than my first car. She looked annoyed. Imogen, she said, her bright voice straining slightly. I thought we had an understanding. I told you the photographer was coming today, but my lockbox is gone. The back door handle is completely destroyed. I told you the listing was fraudulent, I said, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. I told you to cancel the shoot. And I spoke to Jasper, Sable countered, crossing her arms. He assured me this is just an emotional dispute over the inheritance. He's the legal owner of Morrow Holdings, which has a recorded interest in this property. We have a valid right to sell to satisfy the debt. Now, I have a client coming in 30 minutes who is very interested in the bones of this place for a gut rehab. I need the new keys. She wasn't just a clueless realtor. She was actively complicit. She knew the property was in dispute, she knew the owner had just died, and she didn't care. The commission on a Chicago brownstone was too high to walk away from. There are no new keys for you, I said. Imogen, don't make this difficult. If you deny us access, Jasper has authorized me to contact the police and request a civil standby to enter the property. She smiled, a tight, thin-lipped expression. It's his house. I walked up the steps until I was standing inches from her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Call them, I said. Sable's smile faltered. Call the police, Sable. Let's have them out here. I'd love to show them the forged notary stamp on the deed transfer. I'd love to show them the death certificate that proves my grandmother was under heavy sedation in a hospice bed on the day she supposedly signed the paperwork you're holding. And then I'll show them the state registry listing your real estate license. And we can discuss whether you're acting as an accessory to real estate fraud. She took a step back, her clipboard dropping an inch. I'm just doing my job. Jasper gave me the documents. Jasper is hiding in Dubai because he owes money to a hard money lender and private investors, I said. He's broke. The house is in default. There is no commission for you here. Sable, only a subpoena. She stared at me for a long moment. She looked at Arlo, who had walked up behind me and was standing on the lawn, watching her with a blank, unyielding expression. Sable swallowed hard. She didn't say another word. She turned on her heel, walked briskly to her white Lexus, and drove away without looking back. I unlocked the front door and walked into the parlor. The house felt empty. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt heavy, like the air right before a tornado touches down. I sat down in Hester's old armchair. It still smelled like lavender and dust. Arlo came in and leaned against the doorframe. We bought some time. She won't be back. But Quill Funding will, I said. And Jasper's private investors. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It wasn't a call. It was a text message. Not from Nadia. Not from Jasper. It was an international number, but it wasn't the Wu-Wei. It was a UK country code. The message read, I understand you are managing Hester's estate. Do not pay Quill. I hold the original deed. We need to talk. I stared at the screen. The original deed? That was impossible. I had the county records. Another message popped up immediately after. This is Stellan, Hester's brother. I felt the blood drain from my face. Hester didn't have a brother. She was an only child. I had known that my entire life. She had told me that 100 times sitting on the mahogany stairs. I handed the phone to Arlo. He read it, his brow furrowing. Who is Stellan? Stellan? Arlo asked. I have absolutely no idea, I said. My phone buzzed again. An incoming call from the same UK. The screen lit up the dim parlor, vibrating against my palm. I stared at the screen, the phone vibrating against my palm. Arlo didn't say a word. He just nodded toward the device, his expression unreadable. I hit accept and brought it to my ear. Who is this? You have her cadence, the man said. His voice was gravelly, old, and carried a faint clipped accent that wasn't quite British, but definitely wasn't mid. I expected you to ignore the call. Hester would have ignored it. There is no Stellan, I said. Hester was an only child. I know my own family history. You know the history Hester curated for you, he replied, his tone perfectly calm. I am her older brother. I left Chicago in 1974, right after our father died. I've lived in Leeds for the better part of 40 years, but I still have Google alerts set up for the Cook County Property Registry. When a notice of default gets filed on my family home by a predatory lending firm in Skokie, I get an email. I walked over to the front window, looking out at the wet street. If you're really her brother, why haven't I ever heard your name? Because in 1978, your grandmother forged my signature on a quitclaim deed, Stellan said. She stripped my name off the title so she could take out a second mortgage to keep her husband's failing hardware store afloat. When I found out, I threatened to press charges. She told me to go to hell, said she was the one taking care of our mother, and that I had abandoned my right to the house when I moved across the Atlantic. We haven't spoken since. My stomach dropped. I looked at the mahogany staircase, the woodwork Hester had polished every Sunday. You're lying, I said, but the conviction in my voice was paper thin. I have the original deed from 1970, Stellan said, ignoring my accusation, with both our names on it. And I have the forensic handwriting analysis from 1982 proving the quitclaim transfer was fraudulent. I never pushed the issue in court because, frankly, I didn't want to put my own sister in federal prison. I decided to wait her out. Arlo walked over, leaning close so he could hear the audio leaking from the earpiece. Why are you calling me now? I asked. She's dead. You waited her out. Congratulations, I am calling you because I saw the default notice, Stellan said sharply. Jasper's little maneuver is going to cost me my half of the equity. That house is worth roughly $900,000 in today's market. Quill Funding is about to seize it for $150,000. I am not going to let a sleazy hard money lender steal my inheritance, and I am certainly not going to let Jasper's incompetence wipe out an asset I've been waiting 40 years to collect. So what do you want? I land at O'Hare tomorrow at 4 in the afternoon, Stellan said. I'm coming with my own representation. Do not negotiate with Quill. Do not let anyone inside that house. I will see you at 6 o'clock. The line clicked dead. I slowly lowered the phone. The quiet of the parlor suddenly felt suffocating. What did he say? Arlo asked gently. I told him. I repeated every word. As I spoke, I walked out of the parlor and down the hall to Hester's old study. It was a tiny room tucked under the stairs, smelling of old paper and peppermint. Against the far wall was a heavy green metal filing cabinet. I had already gone through the top 3 drawers for her life insurance policies and bank states. The bottom drawer was locked, and I hadn't bothered forcing it because Bowen Locke had already provided the digital portfolio. Give me the crowbar, I said to Arlo. He had left it on the kitchen counter after fixing the back door. He fetched it, walked into the cramped study, and wedged the curved steel under the lip of the bottom drawer. He leaned his weight into it. The cheap metal groaned, and then the locking mechanism sheared off with a sharp snap. I pulled the drawer open. It wasn't full of tax returns or medical receipts. It was full of letters, hundreds of them, bundled together with brittle rubber bands. Some were from the late 70s, the postage stamps faded. Others were newer. Every single one of them was addressed to Stellan Farrow in Leeds. Every single one of them had a red return to sender stamp slapped across the front. She had written to him every year, for decades. I reached past the letters and pulled out a thick manila envelope at the very back. I opened the clasp and slid the contents onto Hester's small oak desk. It was a certified copy of a deed from 1970. The grantors were my great-grandparents. The grantees were Hester Farrow and Stellan Farrow, joint tenants with right of survivorship. Beneath it was a second document, a quitclaim deed from 1978. It transferred Stellan's interest entirely to Hester. I looked at the signature line, Stellan Farrow. I had spent my entire life looking at my grandmother's handwriting. I knew the way she looped her S's and crossed her T's with a heavy downward slant. The signature on the paper was an attempt to copy a man's handwriting, but the underlying mechanics were pure Hester. She really did it, Arlo murmured, standing over my shoulder. I felt a cold, hollow ache in my chest. My grandmother, the woman who had warned me about vultures, the woman who had whispered, protect it when she handed me her financial flash drive. She wasn't just a victim of Jasper's greed. She was the original architect of the fraud. She had stolen the house from her own brother. Jasper hadn't brought the rot into this family. He had just inherited it. Jasper's loan is built on a clouded title, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Quill Funding thinks they have a lien on a house owned entirely by Hester. But Hester didn't legally own the whole house. Stellan still owns half, which means Quill can't foreclose on the whole property, Arlo realized. Exactly. But it also means I can't save it. Not without Stellan. I slumped into the desk chair, staring at the letters. Emerson Wynne told us we needed leverage. I just didn't realize the leverage was going to come from a brother she erased from our lives. I spent the rest of the evening reading the returned letters. Arlo made a frozen pizza, but neither of us ate much. I sat at the dining room table under the warm amber glow of the chandelier, carefully unfolding the fragile paper. Hester's letters weren't apologies. They were justifications. The hardware store is going under. Stellan, you weren't here. You didn't see him coughing up blood. I did what I had to do. In the letters from the 90s, her tone shifted. She started talking about Nadia. Nadia is wild, Stellan. She reminds me of you. Selfish, unmoored. I worry about her. And then, a letter from 2012, right after I graduated college. Imogen is sharp. She sees numbers the way I do. I am going to make sure she's the one who handles things when I'm gone. I just hope you don't come back to tear it all down. She knew. She knew this day was coming. She handed me the flash drive not just to protect the money from from Nadia, but to give me a war chest to fight Stellan when he inevitably returned. Except Jasper had effectively neutralized the war chest, leaving me completely exposed. At exactly 6 o'clock the next evening, a black town car pulled up to the curb outside the brownstone. I was standing on the front porch. Arlo was inside, visible through the screen door, leaning against the hallway wall with his arms crossed. The back door of the car opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, thin, and impeccably dressed in a charcoal wool coat despite the lingering humidity. He had Hester's cheekbones, sharp and unforgiving, and a head of thick, silver hair. He leaned on a dark wooden cane, not heavily, but with a casual elegance. A younger man in a tailored navy suit stepped out from the other side, carrying a leather briefcase. The lawyer. Stellan stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He looked up at the house, his eyes scanning the brickwork, the gutters, the trim. He didn't look nostalgic. He looked like an appraiser. The tuck pointing is failing on the chimney, Stellan said, his first words to his niece in person. It's been failing for 5 years, I said. Hester refused to hire anyone because she didn't trust contractors inside the house. Paranoia is a terrible substitute for maintenance, Stellan replied. He walked up the steps. Up close, his eyes were a pale, icy blue. He didn't offer his hand. May we come in, Imogen? I stepped aside. Stellan walked into the hallway. He paused, looking at the mahogany staircase. He reached out and tapped the newel post with a long manicured finger. Then he walked into the parlor. He didn't look at the wheelchair in the corner. He sat down on the leather sofa, resting both hands on the top of his cane. The young lawyer remained standing. I am Crispin Vance, he said. Counsel for Mr. Farrow. I sat in Hester's armchair. Arlo stayed in the doorway, a silent guard. Let's skip the family reunion, Stellan said, getting straight to the point. I am not here to reminisce about a woman who robbed me. I am here because her idiot son-in-law has put a $150,000 target on my asset. Half an asset, I corrected. A technicality, Stellan waved it away. Here is the reality of the situation. Quill Funding has a recorded lien. They don't know about me yet. When they find out the title was clouded by a 50-year-old forgery, they will not simply walk away. They will file a claim against the estate for the debt, and they will try to force a partition sale of the property to recoup their losses. Emerson Wynn told me a quiet title action would take 2 years, I said. At least, Crispin Vance chimed in, opening his briefcase. And during those 2 years, the property would be tied up in litigation, bleeding value, accumulating property taxes, and paying legal fees. We do not want to litigate this in Chancery Court. We want a clean resolution. What does a clean resolution look like to you? I asked. Stellan leaned forward, his icy blue eyes fixed on mine. We sell the house, immediately, to an all-cash buyer. I have already contacted a developer who buys distressed historical properties. He will pay $700,000 cash. It is under market value, but it bypasses the mortgage contingency and the appraisal delays. And Quill? Arlo asked from the doorway. We pay them off, Stellan said flatly. We take the $150,000 out of the sale proceeds, satisfy the fraudulent lien, and clear the title. The remaining $550,000 gets split down the middle. I take $275. The estate takes $275. Jasper and Nadia's little debt is erased, but we deduct the $150,000 entirely from the estate's half of the proceeds, since it was Hester's side of the family that created the mess. I walk away with my half lien. I stared at. You want me to sell my grandmother's house to a developer who will gut it just to pay off Jasper's debt and hand you a check? I want what belongs to me, Stellan said, his voice hardening. You have no liquid cash. You told me on the phone the trust is frozen. You cannot afford to fight Quill, and you certainly cannot afford to fight me. If you refuse my offer, Crispin will file an injunction tomorrow morning introducing the original deed and the fraud evidence. Quill's foreclosure will be stalled, but the house will be locked in legal purgatory for a decade. You will get nothing. He wasn't negotiating. He was dictating terms. He was using Jasper's fraud as a crowbar to pry the equity out of the house. And what happens to Nadia and Jasper? I asked. They just walk away? Stellan smiled. It was a thin, cruel expression that looked exactly like Hester when she was angry. I don't care about Nadia and Jasper, but if you sign my agreement, you hold the power to dictate what happens to the remaining estate cash once the trust unfreezes. You can leave them with absolutely nothing. Crispin pulled a thick stack of documents from his briefcase and set it on the coffee table. This is the listing agreement and the settlement breakdown. We need your signature as the executor of the estate. I looked at the paperwork. Then I looked at the parlor around me. The doilies on the end tables. The first edition books on the shelves. The dent in the floorboards where Hester had dropped a cast iron pan 20 years ago. Stellan didn't see any of it. He just saw numbers on a ledger. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I ignored it, keeping my eyes on Stellan. It vibrated again and again. Rapid, frantic buzzing. I pulled it out. It was a text from Nadia. A local Chicago number. Imogen. Please, we're at O'Hare. Jasper left me. I read the message twice. He took my passport and the remaining cash. I'm at Terminal 5. He got on a flight to London. The guys he owes money to found out about the house. Another text popped up immediately. They're already on their way to the brownstone. Imogen, they have guns. Please call the police. I stared at the glowing screen, the words blurring together for a fraction of a second before my brain snapped back into forensic mode. Guns. Nadia was a phenomenal, effortless liar when she was trying to get out of a dinner party or secure a loan for a fake boutique. But she was a terrible liar when she was panicked. She always overplayed her hand. She leaned into melodrama because she thought it made her sound more convincing. They have guns was a line straight out of a late-night cable movie. If private investors from a hard money syndicate were actually coming to seize a multi-million-dollar asset, they wouldn't send armed thugs to a prime Chicago neighborhood to shoot up a brownstone. They would send lawyers. They would send foreclosure notices. Violence draws cops, and cops freeze assets. I typed back, I just called 911. I gave them your description and told them you are at Terminal 5 in immediate danger. Armed airport police are on their way to your gate right now. The typing bubble appeared on my screen immediately. It pulsed for 3 seconds. seconds. No, wait. Imogen, don't call airport security. I have an outstanding bench warrant for a bounced check in Naperville. They'll arrest. Tell them not to come. I let out a harsh, jagged breath. No hitmen, no guns, just my sister. Stranded, broke, and desperately trying to manipulate me into unfreezing the trust to bail her out. Jasper really had left her. That part was almost certainly true. He took the cash, hopped a flight to London, and left her holding the bag for the defaulted loan in a city where she couldn't even afford a cab ride home. I turned my phone off completely and slipped it into my back pocket. Stellan was watching me from the leather sofa. He hadn't moved. His hands were still resting on the polished wood of his cane. Family drama? He asked, his voice dry. Just my sister, I said, reminding me why I froze the accounts in the first place. I looked down at the stack of documents Crispin Vance had placed on the coffee table. The listing agreement for the developer. The settlement breakdown. It was all so neat and tidy. A clean amputation of my family's history. I'm not signing this, I said. Crispin sighed. A practiced, condescending sound. Miss Farrow, I understand this is emotional, but as I explained, the alternative is years of litigation. If we file the injunction tomorrow morning, file it, I interrupted. Stellan's eyes narrowed. You think I'm bluffing? You think I won't tie this house up in Chancery Court until the roof caves in? I think you can't afford to, I said. I walked over to the armchair and sat down, crossing my arms. I wasn't a lawyer, but I spent 50 hours a week auditing corporate ledgers, unwinding shell companies, and finding the hidden leverage in bankruptcy settlements. I knew how to look at a timeline and see where the math didn't add up. You have a forensic handwriting analysis from 1982, I said, looking right at Stellan, which means you knew about the forged quitclaim deed 44 years ago. You knew Hester stole your half of the house. I already told you that, Stellan said. Right. And you said you didn't sue her because you didn't want to put your sister in federal prison. But that's a lie. The statute of limitations on criminal forgery is 3 years. By 1986, she was completely safe from criminal prosecution. You could have sued her in civil court to quiet the title any time in the last 40 years without risking her going to jail. But you didn't. Crispin shifted on his feet. He looked at Stellan. It was a microscopic movement, but I caught it. You didn't wait her out, I continued, my voice gaining traction. You realized that if you took her to court, Hester would counter-sue for property maintenance. For 44 years, she paid the property taxes on a house in one of the most expensive zip codes in the Midwest. She paid the homeowner's insurance. She replaced the roof twice. She upgraded the plumbing. She paid the water bills, the gas bills, the tuck pointing that you just complained about on the front porch. You abandoned the property in 1974 and didn't contribute a single cent to its upkeep. Arlo stood up straighter in the doorway. A slow, grim smile touched the corners of his mouth. If you file an injunction to force a partition sale, I said, leaning forward, Emerson Wynn will file a counterclaim for equitable reimbursement. In Illinois, a co-tenant who pays more than their share of taxes and necessary repairs is entitled to a credit from the proceeds of the sale. 44 years of Chicago property taxes, adjusted for inflation, plus maintenance, your half of the equity is roughly $450,000. I'm willing to bet Hester's tax and repair ledgers total well over $500,000. You don't have a claim, Stellan. You have a debt. The parlor went dead silent. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. Stellan's face was perfectly still. The icy blue eyes didn't blink, but his knuckles, gripping the handle of the cane, went stark white. She kept everything, I said softly. Every receipt, every tax bill. It's all in the filing cabinet in the study. You came here today with a developer's contract hoping I would be too panicked by Quill Funding's foreclosure to do the math. You wanted a quick cash out before the estate lawyers realized your claim is functionally worthless. Crispin cleared his throat. Miss Farrow, equitable reimbursement is entirely discretionary to the judge. It is not a guaranteed offset. My client's ownership of the deed is absolute. Then take it to court, I challenged him. Let's tie it up for 2 years. Let's see what a Cook County judge thinks about a man who abandoned his sister to care for their dying mother, fled the country, and came back half a century later to evict his niece. Stellan let out a long, slow breath. He tapped his cane against the floor rug once. You really do have her cadence, he murmured. She was a vicious negotiator too, always calculating the exact moment to pull the rug out. I'm not Hester, I said. Hester stole from you. I am just balancing the ledger. So where does this leave us? Stellan asked, dropping the pretense. The aristocratic posture melted away, leaving a tired, bitter old man sitting on my grandmother's sofa. Quill Funding is still going to foreclose in 25 days. My deed might cloud the title, but without a court order, Thad at Quill is going to auction this property on the courthouse steps. If that happens, we both lose. I need your original 1970 deed, I said, and I need you to sign an affidavit stating that the 1978 quitclaim was forged, backed by your forensic report. Why? Because if I take those documents to a judge, I can get an emergency injunction against Quill Funding without having to post a $150,000 cash bond. I can prove the collateral they lent against was fundamentally defective at the time of origination. They can't foreclose on a house that Hester didn't legally have the right to mortgage in the first place. And what do I get in return for handing you my only leverage? Stellan asked. When the trust clears probate in 6 months, I said, I will write you a check for $50,000 from the liquid assets. Clean cash, no legal fees, no court battles. You sign over your remaining claim to the house, and you go back to Leeds. Crispin leaned down and whispered something in Stellan's ear. Stellan waved him off without looking at him. 50,000 is an insult, Stellan said. 50,000 is 50,000 more than you would get if we did a full tax accounting in Chancery Court, I replied. And you know it. Stellan stared at me. He looked around the room, his eyes lingering on the first edition Hemingway on the shelf, the one Jasper hadn't managed to steal, and then at the mahogany trim around the windows. He looked exhausted. The anger that had fueled him across the Atlantic seemed to evaporate, leaving behind a hollow resignation. Have Crispin draft the affidavit, Stellan said finally. I want the 50,000 guaranteed in writing, secured against the estate's liquid liquid assets. Done, I said. They didn't stay long after that. Crispin packed up his useless listing agreements, his face flushed with professional embarrassment. Stellan stood up, using his cane for support, and walked out into the hallway. He stopped at the front door and looked back at me. Hester was terrified of being poor, Stellan said, his voice stripped of the gravelly edge, sounding suddenly very quiet. That's why she forged the deed. That's why she pushed everyone away. She thought money was the only thing that couldn't betray her. Look at what it brought into her house in the end. He walked out into the humid evening air. Arlo shut the door behind them and locked the deadbolt. I leaned against the hallway wall and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since Thursday. My legs were shaking. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the hardwood floor, resting my head against the plaster. Arlo sat down next to me. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just wrapped his arm around my shoulders and pulled me close. You just outmaneuvered a 40-year grudge, Arlo said quietly. I bought us time, I corrected. I can use Stellan's affidavit to block Will's foreclosure. The house is safe for now. But Jasper still stole $138,000 in real cash, I said, staring at the baseboards. He pulled it out of the equity. Even if I block the foreclosure, Quill Funding isn't just going to walk away from that kind of money. Once they realize they can't take the house, they are going to sue the estate for the cash. And since Hester's name is on the promissory note, the estate is legally liable for the debt. I rubbed my eyes. The forensic accountant in me was already running the spreadsheets. If Will sues the estate for the cash, the probate judge will order the debt paid out of the liquid assets. That means the $150,000 comes straight out of the trust, plus Stellan's $50,000, plus legal fees. I looked at Arlo. Jasper didn't just try to steal from us. He successfully managed to drain half of my grandmother's net worth, and he's going to get away with it because he did it in her name. Not if we find the money, Arlo said. I shook my head. Jasper said the wire was flagged. He said it was stuck in a holding account, but he also said men with guns were coming to the house. He lies when he breathes. Arlo, he didn't leave that money sitting in an escrow account. He moved it, so we track it. I pushed myself off the floor. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, methodical determination. I wasn't just trying to protect the house anymore. I was going to find every single cent Jasper had taken, and I was going to nail him to the wall with it. I went back to the dining room table and opened my laptop. I pulled up the settlement statement from Quill Funding. I looked at the wire transfer confirmation at the bottom of the page. The funds had been wired to a business checking account at a regional bank in Illinois, under the name Morrow Holdings LLC. I already knew Morrow Holdings was Jasper's shell company, but bank accounts leave digital footprints. If he moved the money out of that account, it had to go somewhere. I couldn't subpoena the bank records without a court order, but I didn't need to. I had something better. I had Hester's laptop. Hester had allowed Jasper and Nadia to live in the brownstone for weeks at a time. Jasper was notoriously cheap. He never paid for his own Wi-Fi hotspots, and he never missed an opportunity to use someone else's printer. I walked into the study and booted up Hester's old desktop computer. It was agonizingly slow, clicking and whirring as the hard drive spun up. I opened the network sharing center. Just as I suspected, Hester's network was set up to automatically sync and store local cache files for any device connected to the home network. It was an old default setting from Windows 7 that no one ever bothered to turn off. I dug into the temporary internet files and the shared document folders. It took me 3 hours of sifting through junk data, old recipes, and thousands of corrupted image thumbnails. At 1 in the morning, I found it. A PDF document that had been temporarily spooled to Hester's wireless printer 2 weeks ago. The file name was Morrow_transfer_auth.pdf. I opened it. It was a digital wire authorization form from the regional bank in Illinois. Jasper had printed it, signed it, and presumably scanned it back and using his phone to send to the bank. The form authorized the transfer of $138,000 from Morrow Holdings LLC to a receiving account. I zoomed in on the receiving account details. It wasn't an offshore account in the Caymans. It wasn't a crypto exchange. It wasn't a holding account for private investors. The receiving account was a domestic checking account at a Chase branch in downtown Chicago. The account holder's name was Sable Ives. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in the dark study. Sable Ives. The chipper, aggressive real estate agent who had shown up on my porch yesterday, demanding to put a lockbox on the door. The woman who claimed she was just doing her job to sell a distressed property. She wasn't just the realtor. She was the bagman. Jasper hadn't fled to London because private investors were chasing him. He fled to London because he had successfully laundered the equity of my grandmother's house through a licensed real estate broker, and he was getting out of the country before the dust settled. Sable was probably holding the cash in her personal account to bypass the fraud flags that would have tripped if Jasper had tried to wire $138,000 directly to an international account in his own name. Sable was going to take her cut, list the house, force a quick cash sale to her developer buddy to cover the tracks, and wire the rest of the clean money to Jasper. Arlo, I called out. My voice was completely steady. He appeared in the doorway a few seconds later, holding 2 mugs of tea. He saw my face and set them down on the desk. What did you find? I pointed at the screen. Sable Ives has the money. Arlo leaned in, reading the transfer authorization. His jaw tightened. She stood on our porch and threatened to call the police while she had $138,000 of your grandmother's money sitting in her checking account. She thought we were stupid, I said. She thought I was just a grieving granddaughter who didn't understand how title loans worked. I pulled my own phone out of my pocket and turned it back on. It chimed with 3 new voicemails from Nadia, all frantic, all begging for money to get out of O'Hare. I deleted them without listening. I opened my browser and looked up the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. I found the portal for filing emergency complaints against licensed real estate brokers. Then, I opened a second tab for the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. What's the play? Arlo asked, watching my fingers hover over the keyboard. We don't call her, I said. We don't threaten her. We don't give her a chance to move the money or panic. Tomorrow morning, I take this wire transfer document to Emerson Wynn. We file an emergency ex parte motion to freeze Sable Ives' personal and business bank accounts based on receiving stolen funds from a fraudulent real estate transaction. Can a judge do that without notifying her first? If we show them the forged deed and the wire transfer linking the fraud directly to her account? Yes, they'll lock her accounts down instantly to prevent capital flight. I looked at the time. 1:15 a.m. By noon tomorrow, Sable Ives goes to buy a coffee, and her card gets declined. She logs into her banking app and sees a negative balance and a legal hold. And then she realizes she is on the hook for $138,000 in wire fraud, conspiracy to commit mortgage fraud, and accessory to grand larceny. I leaned back in Hester's chair. The lavender and peppermint smell of the room felt less like a ghost and more like an anchor. Jasper thinks he's safe in London, I said. He thinks he left Nadia to take the fall, and he thinks Sable is going to quietly forward him the cash. But when Sable's accounts freeze and she gets served with a federal subpoena, she isn't going to protect him. She's going to flip on him to save her own real estate license. Arlo nodded slowly. We bury them. We bury them in paperwork. I agreed. The next morning, the sky over Chicago was a brilliant bruised purple, heavy with the threat of more rain. I was sitting at the dining room table compiling a digital dossier on a flash drive. The wire transfer, the forged deed, Stellan's affidavit, the IP logs from the airport, the fake audio file. It was a masterpiece of forensic evidence. My phone buzzed. I expected it to be Emerson Wynn's paralegal, confirming our morning appointment. I looked at the screen. The caller ID made the blood freeze in my veins. It was Bowen Locke, the estate broker who managed Hester's liquid trust. I picked up the phone. Bowen, tell me everything is secure. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear the faint sound of traffic in the background. He wasn't in his office. Imogen, Bowen said. His voice was entirely different from the tight, professional tone he had used when he called about the fake audio file. It was flat, resigned. I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to not interrupt. I gripped the edge of the table. What happened? The trust account is empty, Bowen said. I stopped breathing. That's impossible. I locked it down. It requires dual authentication from both of us to even view the balance. The probate hold only applies to assets held entirely in the deceased's name at the time of death. Bowen interrupted. His words were coming fast now, rushing out as if he was afraid he would lose his nerve. The dual authentication was a software lock on the client portal. It doesn't override a direct institutional withdrawal order. Who withdrew it? I demanded, my voice rising. Arlo walked into the room, instantly alert. I did, Bowen said. The floor seemed to tilt underneath me. You? Bowen, you're the fiduciary. You're legally bound. I transferred the $450,000 to an offshore clearing account in the Bahamas 2 hours ago. Bowen continued, ignoring me. The transaction is fully cleared. The money is gone. And in about 10 minutes, I'm boarding a flight that does not have an extradition treaty with the United States. Why? I gasped. The betrayal was so absolute, so structurally impossible, that my brain couldn't process it. You've managed her accounts for a decade. And for a decade, I've been drowning in my own margins, Bowen said. Jasper wasn't the only one who borrowed money from the wrong people, Imogen. When Jasper submitted that fake audio file, I knew he was making a play for the cash. And I knew that if I told you, you would freeze the account, locking the funds in place. Safe from him. Safe from probate. He let out a ragged sigh. You locked the vault, Imogen. You built the perfect, untouchable fortress to protect the money. And you gave me the keys. No one was looking at the account because you made sure no one could look at it. You bought me the time I needed to route it out. I have your security affidavit, I said, panic threading through my anger. I have your digital signature. You have a piece of paper that proves I reported a fraud attempt, Bowen said. It proves I was doing my job right up until the moment I emptied the ledger. I'm sorry, Imogen. I really am. Your grandmother was a good client, but I couldn't let Jasper take the money I needed to save my own life. The line clicked dead. I sat perfectly still. The flash drive in my hand, full of evidence against Jasper and Sable, suddenly felt entirely useless. Jasper hadn't been the mastermind. He was just a sloppy, desperate thief who had accidentally provided the perfect cover for a professional to commit the real crime. The house was safe from quill funding. Stellan was neutralized. Sable Ives was about to have her accounts frozen. But the $450,000, the money Hester had spent a lifetime hoarding, the money that was supposed to pay off the debts, the money I had sworn to protect, was gone. And the man who took it wasn't a family vulture. He was the guard I had hired to watch the door. Arlo touched my shoulder. Imogen? I looked up at him. The forensic accountant in me was dead. There was no math that could fix this. Bowen took it, I whispered. He took it all. My phone buzzed again, vibrating against the wood of the table. It was a text from an unknown number. Check the mail slot. I didn't move. I couldn't. Arlo saw the message, frowned, and walked to the front door. He opened it, checked the brass mail slot, and came back holding a small padded envelope. It had no postage. Someone had walked up to the house and dropped it through the slot while I was on the phone. Arlo tore it open and let the contents slide onto the table. It was a small black USB flash drive, identical to the one Hester had handed me 8 months ago before she lost the use of her hands. Wrapped around the flash drive was a single piece of lined notebook paper. The handwriting wasn't Hester's. It wasn't Jasper's. It was written in sharp, precise block letters. Bowen Locke thinks he is smart. He thinks an offshore clearing account is untraceable. He doesn't know that Hester paid me a retainer 5 years ago to audit her own fiduciary. Plug it in, Imogen. We have work to do. I stared at the note. I stared at the flash drive. Who? Arlo asked, staring at the paper. I didn't know, but whoever it was, they had been watching Bowen, and they had been watching me. I reached out and picked up the drive. It was cold, the cheap plastic casing completely ordinary against my palm. I turned it over once, staring at the small blue logo printed on the side, and then I plugged it directly into my laptop. A single folder popped up on the screen. It was titled Lock_Reconciliation. I opened it. The folder didn't contain encrypted passwords or shadow ledgers. It was exactly what the note promised, a meticulous, devastatingly thorough forensic audit. There were hundreds of PDFs, cross-referenced with bank routing numbers, internal compliance memos from Bowen's firm, and tax discrepancy reports. Who did she hire? Arlo asked, leaning over my shoulder, his eyes scanning the file names. I clicked on a summary document at the top. The letterhead belonged to an independent auditor named Blythe Wolf. I recognized the name immediately. She was a retired SEC regulator who had transitioned into private consulting a decade ago, known in Chicago financial circles for being utterly ruthless and entirely unbribable. I started reading the executive summary. Bowen Locke hadn't just stolen my grandmother's $450,000 today. He had been bleeding her for 5 years. But he hadn't touched the principal. He was skimming the yield. He was diverting fractional percentages of her dividend interest into a dummy account, a classic salami slicing embezzlement scheme that most clients never notice because their overall portfolio still shows growth. But Hester wasn't most clients. She saw numbers the way I did. She noticed a 0.2% discrepancy in a quarterly statement in 2021, and instead of calling Bowen to complain, she hired Blythe Wolf to watch him. Blythe didn't just audit Hester's accounts. She audited Bowen's entire portfolio. The summary detailed how Bowen was skimming from at least 12 other elderly clients. He was using a specific offshore clearing account at a commercial bank in Nassau to launder the fractional yields. She knew, I whispered, the realization sinking like a stone in my stomach. Hester knew he was stealing from her for 5 years, and she never reported him. Why the hell not? Arlo asked, genuinely bewildered. She could have had him arrested and moved the money to a clean broker. I scrolled down to the final page of Blythe's report. There was a scanned handwritten note from Hester attached to the bottom. A clean broker plays by the rules. Hester's sharp slanted handwriting read, a clean broker won't set up the kind of trust I need to keep Stellan and Jasper locked out when I'm gone. I need a broker who is compromised. Bowen is desperate. He thinks he's outsmarting me. Let him build the fortress, Blythe, and when he inevitably tries to take the principal and run, drop the hammer. I sat back in my chair, the breath hot in my throat. Hester hadn't just anticipated Stellan's return and Jasper's greed. She had anticipated Bowen's betrayal. She kept a corrupt fiduciary on a leash because she needed his willingness to bend the law to set up the dual authentication trust. She knew that the moment I locked the accounts, Bowen would panic. She knew he would use his administrative backdoor to drain the principal and flee. She wanted him to do it because by transferring a lump sum of that size across international lines, Bowen escalated his crime from simple fractional skimming to felony wire fraud and grand larceny. I opened the next folder. It was labeled The Hammer. Inside was a fully drafted, unsubmitted whistleblower complaint to the Securities and Exchange Commission, complete with all of Blythe Wolf's evidence. Right next to it was a drafted emergency freeze order addressed to the Bahamian Financial Regulatory Authority. The bank Bowen used wasn't some untouchable shadow institution. It was a heavily regulated commercial bank that complied with international fraud warrants if the SEC was the initiating agency. He's on a flight to Nassau right now, I said, my voice finally finding its footing. The shock was burning away, replaced by the cold, precise machinery of my profession, which means he's entirely disconnected, Arlo said, catching on. He thinks he won, I said, clicking open the SEC portal on my browser. He thinks he's going to step off that plane in 3 hours, walk into a bank in the Bahamas, and withdraw $500,000. I attached the Blythe Wolf audit. I attached the fractional skimming proof. I attached the wire transfer confirmation Bowen had just executed 2 hours ago. I filled out the whistleblower submission forms with my own credentials as a licensed forensic accountant, expediting the review process. I hit submit. Then I took the Bahamian regulatory freeze order, attached the SEC confirmation number, and fired it off to the International Compliance Desk. It's going to hit their system before his plane even begins its descent, I said, closing the laptop. The Bahamian authorities will freeze the clearing account immediately. When Bowen lands, his money will be gone. And because he's a fugitive fleeing an active SEC investigation, they'll likely detain him at customs and deport him right back to O'Hare. Arlo looked at the laptop, then at the filing cabinet in the corner of the study, and finally at me. Your grandmother, he said slowly, was the most terrifying woman I have ever met. She protected it, I said, the words heavy in my mouth. She had whispered it to me in her wheelchair. She hadn't just meant the money, she meant the trap. She had engineered a self-cleaning mechanism for her own estate. Jasper was exiled in London, broke and running from a debt. Sable Ives was about to have her real estate license revoked and her account seized. Stellan was neutralized for 50 grand, and Bowen Locke was flying straight into a federal indictment. The house was quiet. The rain had finally stopped, leaving a pale gray light filtering through the parlor windows. My phone vibrated on the table. I looked at it. It was Nadia again. I had ignored her voicemails. I had ignored her texts. She was stranded at Terminal 5 with a bench warrant in Naperville, no passport, and no husband. I didn't owe her anything. She had tried to steal from me. She had been perfectly willing to let Jasper drain the estate and leave me dealing with a fraudulent foreclosure. I stared at the screen as it buzzed across the wood grain. You don't have to answer it, Arlo said gently. She made her bed. I know, I said, but she was still my sister. And as ruthless as Hester had been, as calculating as she was with Stellan and Bowen, she had still let Nadia sleep in this house when she had nowhere else to go. I picked up the phone and accepted the call. Imogen. Nadia sobbed, her voice cracking the moment the line connected. She sounded small. She sounded completely broken. Please don't hang up. Please, where are you? I asked, my voice flat. I'm sitting on the floor in the bathroom near gate M12, she choked out. Jasper blocked my number. He took the credit cards. I tried to buy a coffee, and it declined. Imogen, I don't have anywhere to go. If I leave the international terminal and try to take the blue line, the transit cops randomly scan IDs. If they run my name, they'll arrest you for the bounce checks in Naperville. I finished for her. Yes, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry about the house, about the money. I didn't know he was taking a loan out on the brownstone. I swear to God I didn't know until we were in Dubai. He told me it was just the bonds. Does it matter? I asked. You were fine stealing the bonds. She didn't have an answer for that. She just cried, the sound echoing hollowly off the airport bathroom tiles. I closed my my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. The anger I had carried for the last week was suddenly gone. There was no fiery satisfaction in hearing her cry. It was just pathetic. It was just a tired, sad reality of a woman who had married a con artist because she didn't want to work for a living, and who was now paying the absolute highest price for her laziness. I am not giving you any money, Nadia, I said. The trust is in federal lockdown because of Bowen. Even if I wanted to, I can't access a dime. I don't need the trust, she begged. I just need you to come get me. Please, Arlo has a car. If you drive to the arrivals curb, I can walk out. I just need a ride to a motel. I just need to get out of this airport before security realizes I've been sitting here for 8 hours. I looked at Arlo. He was watching my face, reading the shift in my posture. He didn't look angry. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his car keys, setting them quietly on the table. If I come get you, I told Nadia, my tone leaving zero room for negotiation, you do not come to the brownstone. You are not stepping foot in Hester's house. Arlo will drop you at the extended stay motel in Rosemont. I will pay for 1 week, 7 days. That is exactly enough time for you to call a public defender, turn yourself in for the Naperville warrant, and set up a payment plan for your bad checks. Okay, she gasped, practically hyperventilating with relief. Okay, yes, I'll do it. I promise. If you contact Jasper, if you try to reach out to Sable Ives, or if you ever ask me for a cent of Hester's money again, I will personally drive to the Naperville police station and hand them the audio file of you trying to wire fraud the estate. I won't, she cried. I swear, Imogen. Thank you. I hung up the phone. I stood up, pushing my chair back from the dining table. The flash drive was still plugged into my laptop, a small, silent monument to Hester's paranoid brilliance. You're paying for a week at a motel? Arlo asked, picking up his keys. It's cheaper than paying for a funeral, I said. And it's exactly what Hester would have done. Keep them close enough to watch, but far enough away that they can't touch the silver. Arlo nodded. Let's go get your sister. We walked out the front door, stepping onto the porch. The air was cool, smelling of wet asphalt and Lake Michigan. I locked the new deadbolt behind me, feeling the heavy, satisfying clunk of the mechanism falling into place. The mahogany staircase was safe. The parlor was safe. The estate was locked down tighter than it had ever been. The drive to O'Hare took 40 minutes. The traffic on the Kennedy Expressway was light, the wet tires hissing against the asphalt. Arlo drove while I sat in the passenger seat, watching the city skyline shrink in the rearview mirror. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. We were both just waiting for the final piece of the mess to fall into place. We pulled up to the curb at Terminal 5 arrivals. The international terminal is always a chaotic mess of idling cars and stressed travelers, but I spotted Nadia immediately. She was sitting on a concrete planter near door 5D. She didn't look like the woman who had breezed into Hester's funeral 2 weeks ago wearing a silk mourning dress. She looked hollowed out. Her hair was greasy and tied back in a messy knot. She was wearing a wrinkled tracksuit, and instead of her usual designer luggage, she had a single plastic duty-free shopping bag resting between her feet. Jasper had literally left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and whatever she had bought at the airport terminal before he disappeared. I rolled down the window. Get in. Nadia jumped, startled, then scrambled to her feet. She grabbed the plastic bag and hurried to the car, opening the back door and sliding in. She smelled like stale sweat, cheap airport soap, and pure panic. She opened her mouth, her eyes already welling with tears. Imogen, I don't, I said, cutting her off without turning around. Don't apologize. Don't explain. I don't want to hear about how Jasper manipulated you. I don't want to hear about how you didn't know the extent of the fraud. You knew enough. She snapped her mouth shut. A single tear rolled down her cheek, cutting a path through day-old makeup. Arlo put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. We took her to a cinderblock extended stay motel in Rosemont, just off the highway. It was clean, heavily lit, and completely devoid of charm. It was the exact kind of place Jasper would have rather died than sleep in. I walked into the lobby while Arlo waited in the car with Nadia. I paid for 7 nights in cash. I didn't put a credit card on file for incidentals. I walked next door to a fluorescent lit gas station and bought a prepaid burner phone and a $20 grocery store gift card. When I got back to the car, I opened the rear door and handed her the room key card, the burner phone, and the gift card. Nadia looked down at the plastic items in her lap. Imogen, the phone has 100 minutes on it, I said, my voice perfectly level. Use them to call a public defender in DuPage County. Then use them to call the Naperville police and arrange your surrender for the bench warrant. There is a diner across the street and a pharmacy 2 blocks down. The gift card will get you a toothbrush and a few meals. You have a roof over your head for exactly 1 week. When checkout time hits next Thursday, your key card will stop working. She looked up at me, her lower lip trembling. She looked like she was waiting for a hug or a word of absolution. She was waiting for the sisterly bond to finally kick in and wash away everything she had done. I'm not doing this because I forgive you, I told her. I'm doing this because Hester wouldn't want a pharaoh sleeping on a bathroom floor in Terminal 5. Turn yourself in, Nadia. Pay your debts. Because I am officially out of the bailout business. I shut the car door. We drove back to the city in silence. When we walked into the brownstone, the heavy thud of the deadbolt locking behind us felt like a period at the end of a very long sentence. The fallout hit exactly the way I had modeled it. The next morning at 9:15 a.m., Emerson Wynn called. He had filed the emergency injunction against Quill Funding using Stellan's affidavit and the 1970 deed. The judge took one look at the forensic handwriting analysis and the evidence of the fraudulent notary and slapped an immediate freeze on the foreclosure. Quill Funding's lien was effectively dead in the water. At 10:30 a.m., Sable Ives' personal and business accounts were frozen by a federal judge. Emerson sent me a copy of the docket. Sable was hit with a grand jury subpoena before lunch. I imagined her trying to buy her morning latte, her card declining, the slow, creeping realization that the trap had snapped shut on her. Too, she was going to sing like a canary to the U.S. Attorney's office, and Jasper's name was going to be at the very top of her list. But the real victory came just after noon. The Second Enforcement Division responded to my whistleblower submission. The Bahamian Financial Regulatory Authority had received the emergency emergency freeze order, while Bowen Locke's flight was still somewhere over the Atlantic. When Bowen landed in Nassau and handed his passport to the customs agent, a red flag popped up on their screen. They didn't even let him leave the airport. He was detained, his laptop and phone were seized, and he was put on the next commercial flight back to Miami in federal custody. The offshore clearing account was locked. The $450,000 was secure. It would take a year to untangle it all. A year of probate hearings, SEC interviews, and chancery court filings to formally strip the fraudulent lien off the house and recover the trust money from the government's holding accounts. But the math was solid. The principle was intact. I was sitting in Hester's study a few days later, organizing the last of her tax receipts. The little black flash drive was sitting on the green metal filing cabinet, a silent testament to the woman who had engineered this entire war. Hester was a difficult woman. She was paranoid, unapologetic, and ruthless. She had stolen from her own brother to protect her house, and she had weaponized her own death to trap her corrupt broker. She didn't leave me the estate because I loved her peach cobbler, or because I sat on the mahogany stairs with her when I was a kid. She left it to me because she knew I had the spine to do exactly what she would have done. She knew I could lock the doors. Arlo walked into the study, holding 2 mugs of black coffee. He set one down on the oak desk and leaned against the doorframe. "Emerson called while you were in the shower," Arlo said. "Nadia turned herself in this morning. She's processing through the county jail right now, and the feds officially issued an Interpol red notice for Jasper." I picked up the mug. The porcelain was warm against my palms. "Good," I said. "You okay?" he asked. I looked around the small, cramped room. It still smelled faintly of peppermint and old paper. The house was quiet. No unannounced visits, no sleazy liquidators, no predatory realtors knocking on the door. Just the steady hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the sound of cars passing on the wet street outside. "Yeah," I said, taking a sip of the coffee. "I'm good." I leaned back in Hester's chair, watching the dust motes dance in the morning light filtering through the window. And for the first time since the hospice nurses left, I finally let myself mourn my grandmother.